And it's starting recording. I want to make sure it actually is recording. Does starting recording mean recording? Oh, there we go. All right. So
Yeah.
it went from starting recording to stop recording. You just want to make sure so you don't talk for a couple of minutes and then you're like, ugh.
No, I
So
know. I do interviews as well, and there's nothing worse than like missing an awesome thought or insight because the recording wasn't on.
or a whole podcast. I did an interview a couple of months ago where I interviewed a woman for an hour, and I'm like, this is great. We were talking about green energy and all this stuff, and I actually did record it. But then I'm like, oh, well, I had to run to dinner or do something, some other meeting, and I forgot to download it. And then I just assumed I downloaded it, and I didn't check until after the 30 days. And then after 30 days, Skype just deletes it, and it's gone. And I'm like, oh. So that was, and I've done that before actually, but whoever I interviewed actually downloaded on his own that time. So it did save that, but it didn't save me. So yeah, I'm super paranoid. And whenever I do stand-up comedy, I film with two phones just because you never know something's.
It's always good to have backup for the really important stuff.
So that's our prelude, our whatever you call that in a book. I am with Sarah Campbell, and my name is Josh Rackless. The podcast is Celebrity Josh. But I don't really like the name, so we'll see if I come up with a new one. I don't like my own name either. But for now, that's what it is. And if you're listening to the audio, it's a podcast. If you're watching the video, it's on YouTube or your favorite video site. And that's it. And we're doing this kind of cold. I heard recently on a podcast that that's what Larry King did. He doesn't do research on his interviewees because he likes to learn as he's going. And maybe that's an excuse to not have to do work ahead of time, but it sounded very impressive. He did all right for his life. So there we are. So I'm here with, I guess, Sarah Campbell. I feel like do you have like a middle name or a longer name that you sometimes use?
No, usually just Sarah Campbell. Yeah.
But just some numbers after it usually, because there's a lot of Sarah Campbell, so you can't just have Sarah Campbell at Gmail or something.
Yeah, I had to take my middle initial and put it at the end of my Gmail address. So it's a little odd.
Yeah. Oh, at the end of it. So you were like Sarah Campbell middle initial.
.k, yes.
Yeah, okay. So that's the kind of thing that when you've got a name like John Smith, you gotta play the game.
Shuffle the letters.
That's the one thing that I like about Josh Rackless is even though it's hard to spell and remember, there's no other Josh Rackless, so I get everything. But of course, now somebody listening to this is going to try to grab Josh Rackless. Actually, somebody did steal JoshRackless.com when I let it expire, and that was trouble for a few years. But then he let it go because he realized, oh, I'm not going to get any money from this. He's not famous. Who cares? So how did I find you? Because you did a Creative Mornings? I'm trying to remember.
Yeah, that's right. I led a field trip through the organization Creative Mornings on the topic of how to keep going.
Right. And because I need that, I didn't even make it to the event. I don't know what I was doing. But I emailed you after and I'm like, here's my secret way of getting the free scoop without having to attend the event. I'll interview you for my podcast. Now I get like a free whatever minutes with you, although we've already spent 7 minutes and done nothing. But that's maybe that's part of what I need to learn as well. Because what I've done today is nothing. I went to bed like too late again, and then I woke up and I'm living with my parents and they were sort of banging around in the morning and I'm like, oh, I haven't had enough sleep, and then I just sort of lay in bed for 5 hours and then here I am. So hopefully you can help me. What would be your little your intro? Like what are you, a coach or?
I think of myself primarily as a writer because I am, and I've also done a lot of learning design for adults. So I've taken some of my learning about learning principles for adult learning and thought about how can you help someone finish a difficult project that they care a lot about. And then I just like writing on process, creative process primarily, but also everything from what sports psychology knows about endurance to neuroscience and what it means to be motivated to do something. Do rewards really work? I love this blend or at least I feel my writing kind of blends self-help with science. So with psychology, with other kinds of studies on human motivation and our relationship to our work. And I also like looking at organizational psychology too, though really I'm more focused on what happens when we're doing self-directed work. So out of the context of a day job, when we're at home alone working on a book, or maybe we have some other goal like, putting up an online dating profile. When we're the ones in charge, when we're our own bosses, what's the relationship of the project to ourselves, and how does that play out? What are some of the mind games, some of the environmental hacks and tweaks we do to our workspaces or our studio spaces, our living rooms? Where do we work? How do we work? Especially when it's work we want to do and a project we want to do, and why are self-chosen projects sometimes so hard to keep going. There's so many reasons, but I'm fascinated by that. So that's sort of how I stumbled into this. Obviously, it was like through my own personal unfinished work that I began like looking for help on this and reading it, and then the antidote kind of became the new problem for me. So I had been reading a lot on how to finish things, and then I thought, wait a minute, like which parts of these help me and which parts don't resonate. And I started just taking notes and thinking about leading workshops on it for other people. And so, yeah, I kind of replaced one unfinished project with now my current in progress unfinished project, which is finish it.
Cool. Yeah, because I mean that's a good thing to do if there's something that you're working on yourself, and then you learn about it, and then you're like, oh, I can turn that into a job or money or something, because clearly it's something you're interested in as well. And if
Yeah.
you're doing research to help yourself, I mean, that's what it's all about. Everybody teaching things online now. You learned it yourself. Now you can pass it on. And it
Yeah.
all seems particularly appropriate for the pandemic now, like,
Yeah.
or like a lot of people weren't working at their jobs. And so you were doing this before and it just happened, you lucked out with a pandemic, or?
Oh, I don't think any of us lucked out with this
No, I don't.
pandemic.
That's my sense of humor.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, I have been somewhat obsessed with the topic of finishing. And I should say I mentioned science a lot, but I'm also interested in the art of finishing. So the more elusive, um, idiosyncratic and kind of unnameable qualities that certain people have that allow them to either finish, something that's especially hard versus not. But anyway, I would say, yeah. So I've been interested in this since about 2014 when I abandoned a book project on that book. That unfinished book was about can you learn how to be creative from other people. And it just became unwieldy, and it was huge and lovely. And I did tons of research and interviews, and then I just felt kind of overwhelmed by what I had bitten off with the topic. And that's when I started reading up on more self-help materials on finishing things. But to your point about the pandemic, I think it's super resonating with people right now who either were able to dig into and really engage with some self-directed work at home, or alone or not alone in the midst of their families last year. And have you read Adam Grant's column on languishing that some people have been talking about this spring?
no.
Adam Grant is an organizational psychologist, if you haven't heard of him. And he wrote in the New York Times an op-ed on what he calls languishing. I actually think it's a psychology term. But he said, some of us aren't actually burnt out, but we're not flourishing. And we're kind of in this middle area between, we're not depressed, but we're not doing great either. And he says that's got a name, and it's called languishing. And he said in some of the studies he's read that, now they're starting to have some studies coming out of last year about people's mental health and well-being. And he said that this one study found that the people who did the best, like maintain their levels of happiness and wellness, their pre-pandemic levels, these were folks who had been able to get into a state of flow. So it wasn't to do with mindfulness or meditation, but that state of flow of working on something where you kind of lose yourself and you get really into your project. those people reported the highest levels of feeling okay. And I was thinking about that, and I thought, that kind of happened to me last year. I had a job end right around the time the pandemic lockdown began, and I had more time, with the exception of a few months when my daughter was home, from school full time. But I began working much more intensively on Finish It last year, just writing more, created an Instagram page, started connecting with people about it, and got the idea that I wanted to do some workshops on it. Had been attending Creative Mornings field trips and thought, I should lead one. And what would my topic be? Well, what have I been reading for the last 5 years and writing about and thinking about and informally talking to friends and coaching friends about? And so I do think now, especially if people can find something to dig into where they a little bit lose themselves, there's no guilt in that, right? It really, I think now for our mental health, more than anything else, having a project of your own that you just are really enjoying and can kind of lose yourself in is super valuable.
Yeah, my sister found that. I didn't even know she was working on this really, but I saw like a couple of years ago she was doing haiku poetry, and just for herself on her Instagram, writing haikus every day, and then people really liked it, so she started a separate Instagram for just her haiku. And then I found out like a month or two ago, I don't know if I saw it on her Instagram feed or something, or it said she's a founder of this in her bio. I'm like, what is this? And it's like she made a whole Instagram. I guess I could plug it. She calls it Hello Koo, like HELLOKOO, and it's a community of Instagram, like of people who like writing haikus. So she'll do a prompt every day and say, here's the first word or here's the first sentence, and then every morning she gets up and she's got a couple of kids, so she's busy, but she'll spend time on her own and do a graphic of her own poems or somebody else's poems, make sure to comment on everybody's, and she's building this community. And I was like, and I started messaging her advice. I was like, I've read about how to monetize, how to make merch. She said, no, I've got it covered. I've got a guy who's building me a website and whatever. And she's like, okay, so she doesn't need my advice, but yeah, I guess in terms of what you're talking about, having a project to work on, it really was, good therapy in a way, and also gives her hope of making money and building a community. And so that's what I've been trying to do too. I was like, I should do that. And she's like, don't steal my idea. I'm like, all right. But what could I do? And so I was like, well, maybe I like doing comedy, so maybe I'll start doing comedy prompts. And so I did one, and then I was going to make a video reading everybody's jokes to the setup I did, but it was 2 weeks ago, and I still haven't even. I was going to do this every day, and I only did the one. I haven't even filmed my video, but the answers. So I every day I come up with more little ideas and maybe try it for 2 seconds, and then I don't finish it, as we say.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what the answer is. I just know that today I got nothing done. But on the days where I do just get up at 6, go for a run, I'm done at 7, I sit down at work, sit down to work, I feel a lot better. I feel more in control of my day. I feel like, oh my God, I spent 5 hours working on something. I feel good about my life. And on the days like this where I just get up and I sort of waste 6 hours and I'm like, oh my God, am I going to be late for this 3 p.m. podcast interview? Like, what's the excuse there? I feel bad.
So that's something I actually talked about in the How to Keep Going field trip is the self-blame side of burnout. And that's actually one of the symptoms that, people who study job-related burnout find. It's not just that you're feeling physically exhausted or mentally exhausted, but that there's this element of how you talk to yourself that's really hard on yourself. So people who are feeling burnout will sometimes say, like, why can't I handle this better? Like, why am I not stepping up and rising to this, challenging time or task? And it's actually a symptom of burnout. So one of my tips for how to keep going is to build in breaks and to take breaks. And so, a one way to reframe when you said I wasted, however many 6 hours today, maybe that wasn't actually wasted time. Maybe that was a nap you really needed to like recharge your brain so that you can do more focused thinking later or tomorrow. Maybe not every day has to look the same.
Yeah.
For some creative folks, it won't, and it never will. So a lot of what I talk to people about is like just the realism of what, like kind of watching your own patterns as a creator, knowing your circadian rhythm, like, are you a night owl or a morning person? Like, that's real stuff. And there's a real internal clock to everyone that if you fight it, you'll just constantly feel frustrated. If you believe, oh, if I don't get up by 8 and like if I'm not writing by 9, like I'll never be a great writer. For so many people, that just doesn't work with who they are, physically and mentally. So I'm a firm believer in like taking breaks and really not feeling guilt about them if you can, right? Like some people don't quite have that luxury, but if you have some flexibility in your schedule and you can tweak things a bit, then absolutely, like you should just like get to know, when are your best hours, and maybe taking a full day off, every 2 days is how you do your best work.
Yeah, and my problem is I've taken a full 6 years off, and I feel like that's a long enough nap. I left my copywriting job 6 years ago. I'm like, I'm going to be free to work on my own stuff and freelance and be and eventually 2 years ago I sold my condo. I'm going to be a digital nomad. I'm going to go anywhere, and I didn't go anywhere, and now I've been in my parents' basement for a year. And so I have no family. I've got no job. I've got no responsibilities. Like I could be working 24 hours a day or whatever. So that's what's frustrating.
Yeah.
But
you may be someone who actually thrives from some constraints, right? Like,
yeah,
not everyone wants absolute freedom. It's terrifying.
yeah. My mom's always she's been talking about that for forever, like how you got to if you work for yourself, you got to treat it like a job, like get up at 9 and work I had this friend, Steve, in college, who we formed a little comedy troupe together. And then on weekends, he was always like, we took copywriting school together, and he was always doing his comedy on the weekends, or Friday or Saturday night, he'd be at home writing his comedy or doing a show. And I'm like, come on, man, why don't you come to a bar? What are you doing working? He said, no. And then he was doing comedy at a comedy festival, and then CBC, like the big, Canadian TV network, discovered him and gave him a radio show. And now that's his whole business. And it's because he actually worked at it. And what did I get out of going to bars and getting drunk? Not much. So you do have to have, I guess, some discipline for it, and just whatever structure you need. I keep making a schedule for myself. 2 years ago, I wrote up a schedule: 7 a.m. get up and do this, 8 a.m. do, trade your stocks, 9 a.m. do a podcast interview, whatever. And I never actually followed the schedule. So
right.
I don't know, but that's enough of woe is me, I guess. But I did over the winter.
It's very relatable. I can't tell you how many different work schedules I've designed for myself when I've been free from day jobs. There's so many versions of like, okay, no, I'm going to begin every day with a walk. No, I'm going to begin every day with writing. And I'm still like, even as we speak, like, this summer I've had like 3 different versions, and I'm still tweaking them and assessing them and tracking my time and wondering what's the better thing. But I do think a certain amount of self-acceptance is key to kind of just like settling into a more like a less self recriminating relationship to yourself.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I've heard recently that when you talk negatively to yourself, your body actually, it senses that, and it affects your cells and your brain, and it doesn't want to hear negative things. So it is whatever you have to do to speak positively to yourself. Like Mel Robbins, who wrote that book about becoming happy, I think. She does a thing on her Instagram where every time you walk past a mirror, you give yourself a high five or something. They're like, I love it. It feels good. You're building yourself up. So little tricks like that. Like they say, even if you smile, it tricks your body into thinking, oh, we're happy. So now you feel happy. So
right. And I mean, like the one thing I learn as I read more and talk to more people is there really isn't a silver bullet routine. And the people who tell you, follow this pattern or do these 4 things, they might make you feel good for like 2 weeks, but it's not going to be sustainable if it really doesn't sync up with, like I say, your own like internal clock and just how you have found in the past you do your best work. I think our past histories are these wonderful like treasure maps to like clues in those to how we can work well again if we've gone through a dry patch, or thinking back to when did I feel really great about a project? What was I doing? What was the content? Was I working alone or with other people? And just putting the pieces together and noting from your past history, like what did it look like? And is that still true for the person I am today? Just a recent story that's sort of related, a little bit off tangent, but I've been thinking about like goal setting a lot, and like how do we set goals and then how do we change them in a way that doesn't feel like we're just moving the goalpost constantly on ourselves, either so that we can never, reach what we claim we want to reach, or because we're just indecisive. There's a whole set of reasons that people don't finish things they set out to do. And so I've been thinking about goal setting. And on Saturday, there was this 10K I had signed up for way back in like January 2020, before the pandemic. I signed up, for a 10K. And I'm not a huge runner, but like I had done a half marathon the year before, and like it felt good. I was like, okay, I'll do something smaller, and try and do like maybe one run a year with, running in the company of other people. Anyway, so they canceled it last year, obviously, and then they were able to hold the race this year. And so anyone who had signed up in 2020 could run this year. And when Friday night came around, like I just hadn't been training this last year, I've gotten a little out of shape, certainly with my running. I don't run as much. And I had thought, I can pull something together in like the month leading up to the run. And I probably could have done the run with a lot of like little walking spells. But Friday night, I was just like, I really don't want to do this run. Like, I know I should, and it's cool that this thing that was canceled is now happening. And I was like, nope, that was January 2020, Sarah, and this is July 2021, Sarah, and she doesn't want to do this race. So I didn't show up. And I honestly felt pretty good about it. I mean, a little part of me was like, oh, it would have been nice. I know I would have gotten like a nice adrenaline rush from like the exercise itself and being out with people in, a larger mass group than I have been in 18 months. But no, ultimately I was like, I'm okay with the fact that like July 2021, Sarah is not the same person and has a different goal.
That's interesting. That's not what I expected to hear from the finish it girl. Like, I don't know, you can finish it or you can just not do it at all. I'm like, oh, I guess. But yeah. I mean, there's probably a lesson there that sometimes if you just take things off your plate, like you're like, you know what? Why am I stressing myself over this? I don't want to do it. And then, frees yourself up to do something else. Yeah. Like I sort of have that same feeling about, like I did stand-up comedy 2 weeks ago. There was a summer contest that I did last summer, and I wrote some jokes for it, and I did my act, and I didn't get voted past the first night to round 2 or anything or whatever. And then over the winter, I took some Zoom stand-up classes and some in-person stand-up classes. Not even sure what I learned, but I probably internalized some things. And then I entered the contest a couple of weeks ago. But and I only noticed on Facebook that I happened to look at the Facebook group. Oh, wait, I'm supposed to be doing this in 2 weeks. I didn't even know I was chosen. But I still didn't start writing it until like a few days before. I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? I should look at my old jokes. I don't know. And then on the Saturday before, I got my second vaccine. And then I'm like, I thought of a couple of funny things. And when I walked away from the clinic, I made a little Instagram reel just talking about how I could have gotten a free juice box and I screwed up and I didn't get my juice box. And that kind of went viral. I got like 3,000 views. And then I thought, I can mention that in my stand-up. So I wound up writing just 7 minutes about getting my vaccine. And then part of the joke or what I said in the routine was, I'm just telling you about things that happened in the past couple of days. So that way you'll be more lenient and go, well, he only just wrote this. Like if I have other jokes, they'll be like, it took you 48 years to write this. So
right.
And I wound up winning first prize of the night. Like, awesome. And so I was like, so now I go on to round 2. And I was like, but the day before I was just like, you know what? Do I have to do this? Like, I could just not go. I could just tell them I'm canceled. Like, and this is what happens every time I do stand up. I'm like, I just want to disappear. Why am I doing this to myself? I feel sick.
Right.
And then afterwards, I'm like,
who wrote this plan?
Yeah. Like, what am I getting out of this? And I keep telling myself it doesn't even matter. I don't need, you get nothing. What's the point? There's only 20 people here. Nobody cares. And, but after I do it, I feel all very good. And it's like, I feel like I've accomplished something. I like that I've pushed myself. I put it in my Instagram bio, winner of the round 1 of Yuck Yucks. So yeah, it's hard to know which ones to say, I'm just going to not do it, or I'm going to push myself through this. But even the girl who came in second place, I was talking to her afterwards when we got our group photo together of the top 3 winners, and she's like, yeah, she was about to bail. She was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I guess we all feel that way, so it means you care
Totally.
about it.
Yeah, and I mean, at the risk of sounding cliched, I do think like even our bad experiences are the stepping stone onto the next thing. Whether it's that you get even more clear, like, whoa, this isn't for me, or like, oh wow, sometimes it's good and sometimes it's really good, and like the really good occasions are worth it. So nothing is lost, right? It's all archival material that like
Well,
points you in some future direction.
yeah, James Altucher, I've been listening to his pod, like him being interviewed lately, every day on my run. And he talks a lot about experiments. Like, just
Hmm.
look at everything as an experiment, and if you do it, well, now you know what not to do next time.
Yes,
And
yeah.
I keep hearing him tell this story about Edison when people are like, "Oh, Edison, like, what was it like to fail 10,000 times? Make a light bulb wrong." And he's like, "No, I didn't fail at all. I learned 10,000 ways to not make a light bulb. Like everything takes you
It
further
really
along."
it really does. I mean, all my unfinished projects, like I've stolen stuff from them for later, or they pushed me along further along a path. And so, yeah, I mean, one thing I'd like to say, maybe just in concluding our chat, is that I think I really, despite the name Finish It, this is not a productivity hack. Like, it's not about making more things. It's really about like, how can you enjoy the work you've chosen to do? So that's very much like, I mean, some of my tips I'm sure you could apply to a job where someone else is your boss, but if you've picked this thing and you know it's rewarding to you in moments, like how can you actually make the process like return to that original love you had when you started? Like we all begin projects usually in like some honeymoon moment of inspiration or excitement or caffeination or whatever, where we're like, oh yes, this idea is the one. They aren't always the one, but if it's enough the one and it keeps circling back to you and you can't let it go, and it's sort of like the bear behind your back or on your back. The bear behind you, Werner Herzog calls it. Like it, something about it you need to come to terms with. And whether that's that you create some version of done that you can live with and that feels like complete and done. And it might just be like figuring out how to say goodbye to that thing. So my finish it includes quitting. Like I think quitting can be an amazing way to end something, and sometimes the only way to end something is to say goodbye to it. But how can people make the good quit if that's what they need to do,
That's
or
interesting.
redefine what done looks like? So yeah, I always like want to make that clear lately, is like Finish It isn't about making more stuff. It is about enjoying what you're doing and then like being able to move on to the next thing when it's time to move on, so that you
Right.
can always have a project and not get stuck. Right. There's nothing worse than just being stuck.
Yeah, because it's not a good feeling to feel like, okay, for 20 years I've got this novel I should have written, so it's always hanging over you, and it's maybe keeping you from doing other things.
Right, right.
Just yeah,
Well,
like if you're
studies of regret, they find more people regret the things they didn't do than regret the things they did do.
oh
And so
no,
those
yeah,
unfinished and uncompleted tasks, like psychologists have studied it, even like small interruptions, like that sticks with us in this way that completed work doesn't. And there's a kind of pain in that for some people. So I'm fascinated by like getting people. I'm fascinated and in love with getting people past those
but
stuck moments.
but wouldn't just saying, I'm not going to do it anymore give you that feeling of regret? Like it'd be one of those things that you regret not doing it, or is it more a question of picking the things that you do want to do and then not regretting not doing those, but also accepting that, you know what, maybe that's, the 10K isn't something I really care about, because you only have so much time. So if you're going to focus on
Yeah.
one thing, you can't focus on something else. So maybe it's about figuring out what you want to do.
It's all the things you're saying, and this is why I think psychology is so helpful for people who are creatives and work. Is that, I mean, so much of this is mind games and how you talk to yourself about what you're doing. I've quit things and felt grief and sadness around quitting them for a period until I came to think of them differently, and then I was able to not feel sad about it at all, but feel like this great relief and this great liberation. And to see, I mean, how many of us have like 6 months down the line from something that like ended horribly?
Mhm.
6 months later, we're like, I'm so glad that ended. Like, so sometimes it is definitely hard to feel it in the moment of, some quits you don't choose. And I wouldn't call those like quits necessarily. I mean, for me, quitting in its best form is something you're actively selecting. And maybe it's like you're choosing it because conditions have become like unbearable. But yeah, ideally, that's sort of the work of Finish It, is like, what does it take to get to that place where you're not just, completely sad or self-doubting or bummed out by the fact that you moved on from something.
Yeah, because I think you also have to, like, something else I was hearing in a podcast a couple days ago was that it's not just about talent, it's about liking something. Like there's child prodigies that maybe are really good at tennis for a few years, but then they just don't like tennis, so they go on. So they're never going to be the best in the world or whatever because they don't care enough to do it. You have to want to do this thing.
Right.
So it's partly finding what you enjoy doing. And I think one little technique I've learned that just maybe works for me or something, because I like immediate gratification. Like if I can write a joke, and that's maybe why I like writing the stand-up act that day, because then I do it that night and I feel like I did it. I don't have to, like I wrote a screenplay 10 years ago in college that took me like a year or two to finish, and I won an award for the first draft, but I never went back to make notes that an LA producer gave me. It's like, I don't want to look at this 90-page thing and sit alone. And now I look back, why didn't I spend a month doing that? It could have changed my life. But maybe if I'd broken it down into, okay, I'm going to type up a scene and I'm going to put it up as a blog, or I'm going to do a live reading on Instagram or something, so that I feel like I'm doing it with my audience, and we're all in this together, and I get a little reward every day. That might be a way that helps people do something that's maybe a longer term thing, because it's hard to say, okay, I'm going to write this book for the next 5 years and see what happens. So
right.
And that's, I guess, why
writing off smaller pieces or cannibalizing what starts as a mammoth project and saying, you know what, I can't do the 300-page book anymore, but maybe it's like 5 little blog posts that get some of my best insights out there. And then I feel a sense of completion that, hey, at least I said the things I really wanted to say. And the other thing I often use for myself is just like, nothing's a final decision in any of this. You can always go back to something and resuscitate it. So saying goodbye doesn't have to be, so loaded. But I think also rituals can help people. What's something you could come up with to just put a completion, like an ending paragraph to that for now? What does that look like for you? And again, I think like sometimes it means chopping something up into different pieces, or it comes out looking differently than you maybe originally set out for it to look.
Yeah, because even like we were saying, if you write 5 blog posts, well, okay, you wrote them in little chunks, you put them up and take the 5 of them. That's a book. That's a 5-chapter mini book that you can self-publish on Amazon or something.
Right.
So that's, I mean, James Altucher talks about that too. Just write a blogs, and then, at the end of the year, I've got 100 blog posts, staple them together, and that's either your book or a rough draft of the book. Or you could take a podcast like this, get somebody to transcribe it, and now I've got a book that in one chapter is my chat with Sarah Campbell, and people can read it, kind of thing. So there's lots, whatever makes it more palatable. And so what are you doing? Like how is Finish It taking form for you now? Like, are you teaching classes? Are you making a book? Like, if people wanted to be trained by you, do they sign up for your course? Like, what happens?
It's many things still. I mean, it's a very much a work in progress. So right now it is a newsletter that comes out about once a month. I was just writing that this morning. It's periodic workshops, like the field trip I led with Creative Mornings. The most recent workshop I've been giving is this How to Keep Going, but I'm in the process of designing 5 steps to finishing. And so, even though I'm not one who subscribes to like, oh, it's only 5 quick things you can do to get your thing done, because I do think life is more complicated than that. I still have distilled a couple areas that I think I can help people think through. And I'm slowly, I'm not trained as a coach, but I've been attending some coaching types of workshops, actually a great one through Creative Mornings yesterday on peer coaching. So I'm becoming fascinated with this idea of how can you support someone, say, to finish a project without telling them how to finish it, but helping them find their own answer, which I think is how a lot of people define coaching, different from, say, mentoring. So in mentoring, you've got an older expert who's sort of saying, this is how I would do it. Here's how I think you can do that too. Whereas a coach would be someone who's more like, I'm going to ask you some open-ended questions, and you probably already have the answer somewhere in you as to how you can move forward, but I'm going to help you with the questions.
Yeah, so, Kathy Heller says that a lot. Like that, she doesn't know the answer, but she gets the answer. The answer is within you, and it's just she's there to help get it out. Because most people probably know what they need to do or how they best do it.
Or you can help them experiment, to your helpful word earlier. Like I think, like, you know, time. People struggle with time. Like, how do you protect the time you've set out for your project? Have you protected any time? When you book it on your calendar, like, ooh, I'm going to spend 3 hours working on my thing. Do you honor those 3 hours, or are you constantly saying, well, that's just my calendar. That was just me. I'm going to go do this other thing. So that's not something I can solve really for anyone, but I can help them with some worksheets. And again, like, I just find a little bit of science can be very compelling. You know, if you hear about, I've been reading more on circadian rhythm, and I'm just like, wow, there's so many ways we could be fighting ourselves less if we just were a little bit more in tune with what we think our natural work patterns are. And when we have slumps during the day, like, those should be the hours you're taking a break versus like trying to hammer away at a tough paragraph or whatever, you know, if you're a writer. But anyway, so I'm setting up, the thing I'm most excited about right now is something I'm calling Finish It Friends. And these are accountability groups of about 3 people, I think, that I'm matching, and they're going to meet for 3 months, 1 time a month for an hour. And I'm providing a structure that will tap into the benefits I think can come from, like, having peers ask you questions, so peer coaching. And then also I'm working on how to involve this idea of deliberate practice into these sessions as well. So I don't know that it's possible, but the idea of deliberate practice is that you know, it's not the quantity of how many times you practice something, but the quality with which you try to change what you're doing between repetitions. So rather than just hitting a ball with a tennis racket 10,000 times, if you can hit that ball with a coach saying, hey, try holding your arm this way or turn your wrist that way, that you're going to improve more with a little bit of feedback and changing what you're doing. Deliberate practice versus just like, I'm just going to be here, like, hitting this ball against a wall 10,000 times. I'm sure I'm going to get better. I love the idea of deliberate practice. I'm not sure what that looks like in the context of helping someone finish something, but I guess that's, you know, what coaching is. So figuring that out.
The Finish It Friends, are you present at those things, or do you sort of arrange it and then they meet themselves?
This is a pilot program, so I'm planning to be present. Light touch in the first and third meetings, and considering letting the group meet on their own with a suggested plan for how they spend the hour for the second meeting.
Yeah, so you can scale it because you've only got so much time in your hour.
Not scalable at all, but for this pilot program, I'm considering it an opportunity to learn, like, what helps people and what doesn't. So it's a time investment that I'm willing to give because I'm interested.
For sure. No, anything you start, with yourself, and you do it manually, and then you see if it works. Everything's
very manually. Even the logistics, like, I'm not good at logistical things, and I'm like, oh, the Google Doc. How do I give people like all the times and sign up? And I'm like,
Well, that's the thing.
I wish I was part of like a nicely funded team, but I'm, it's just me right now. So someday I'll have a business coach and a project manager and an awesome, like, crackerjack team. But
sure, and that's how it starts, right?
Yeah,
I mean, Kathy Heller started just teaching in her living room to 10 people at once, and now she teaches these online courses that she makes $9 million per course, and she's got a whole team of people leading it, and she drops it for an hour a week. So you got to start somewhere and see where it goes. And your newsletter, do you do it like, what do you do it with, Substack or MailChimp or?
Oh, I'm using MailChimp. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm fascinated with newsletters, and it's a free newsletter, or do you charge for it?
It's free. Yeah, free.
But you'll figure out how to monetize it eventually. You could charge for it, or if it's promoting your book or whatever. I want to start a newsletter too. Cool. All right. Well, those are all great ideas. And Joe, just last question. What was it like teaching at Creative Mornings? Because I've been going to a lot of those, and it's just such this mystery. Like, oh, you're on Creative Mornings. It's like you're a god now or something.
Oh, it was so awesome. And I'm not someone who says that lightly, because I led an earlier workshop this year that was okay. But I left that one feeling really drained. And the Creative Mornings workshop, by contrast, I felt so energized by that community. I think 177 people attended, and they're so, as you know, they're so active and engaged in the chat. So even though the format was a bit, unfortunately, more me talking and leading people through quiet writing exercises, so we didn't have like enough time for a Q&A at the end. I kind of kept it pretty tight with the writing. But the chat, when I read it later, luckily Creative Mornings had recorded it, because like I didn't press record in time for the chat. But I read the chat, 2 nights later, and it was so awesome. I just was so grateful for this community. I love how global it is, like just people on all corners of the world dialing in. And it like the rewards from that chat were enough for me to get over like, oh, that's what I look like on video. The unpleasantness of seeing myself on Zoom was offset by this nice chat. So yeah, I highly recommend it. You should lead one.
No, Facebook has a new thing, Facebook Reels. So I posted my little thing about my vaccine on there too. And I'm like, who are all these people commenting saying I'm ugly and everything? I'm like, Jesus, there's some really harsh. And then I look at their profiles. They've all got like 3 friends and no profile photo.
It's probably some horrible bot that's not even a person.
Who knows? But it's funny. But you can't let. Well, you weren't even getting that. But just you can't let your own thoughts about what you look like affect things. It doesn't matter at all. No, but everybody's so positive in those things, because like, sometimes I'll tune in late, or I'll walk away for a second and I'll see in the chat like, oh my God, I'm crying, or that was the most amazing thing I've ever heard. Oh my God, and I'm like, oh my God, what did I miss? But then I realized I think people are just a bit, they're just so supportive no matter what.
It was really great. Like at one point in my presentation, I said, if you were the person, one of my tips for how to keep going is to take the next step before you feel 100% ready to. So it's kind of like tapping into that 80-20 rule. Like if you're almost there, if you feel like you're 80% ready, that means you're ready. And I said, if anyone listening today like needs permission to take that next step they've been sort of waffling on or delaying or hesitating on, like if you need to hear it from someone, I'm giving you permission today. Like the fact that you came to my workshop means you're ready. And someone immediately wrote in the chat, she's like, that's exactly what I needed to hear today. And she described how she needed to like measure her art and ship it out, and why has she been putting this off. So if nothing else came out of that field trip, like that, knowing that one person got unstuck from my comment, that was reward for me for that.
That's good. Great. Yeah, because I think that's what a lot of people need, just somebody to say, yeah, it's fine, do it. Like that's what Gary Vee's always saying, just do it. And Kathy talks about how the only way to learn is to do it. Like, a lot of these big entrepreneurs, they started with a blog on cooking, but then people are like, oh, how do you make money with your blog? And now they're a life coach on businesses. And it's like, you don't know until you try it. So you'll never be ready. You'll never know, this is going to work. You just, like James Altucher says, do an experiment, see if it works. If it doesn't, you just start throwing things out there. And that's why I'm doing the podcast. I still haven't figured out what the point of this is or whatever, but I'm just doing it and I'm throwing it out.
Yeah. I have this, we can end with this quote. Elise Blaha-Kripe. She says, here's the bad news. You are unprepared to do something before you've done it. Here's the good news. That doesn't matter. I love that quote.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll put your contact information in the description of the podcast and YouTube. And is there anywhere you want people to look for you, or?
Oh yeah. I mean, my most active is my Instagram page, Finish It Workshop. Is the handle, and I just have like daily literal post-it notes with quotes or advice, and I also feature mini profiles of people on telling their finishing stories or their unfinished stories as well. So that's a good place to go.
I love it, and like you said, nothing's ever finished, so it doesn't even have to be finished. Just get the story out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Do you actually take pictures of a Post-it note and then?
I do. I'm very analog in some ways about this, but it's the quickest way.
No, that's good because that's what keeps me from drawing cartoons. I'm like, I don't know how to use a drawing app, and I have to scan it. How do I draw the squares? I should just draw a cartoon on a piece of paper, take a photo of it with the pencil in it, so that people know, oh, it's actually a drawing, like it's not even scanned, and just that's it. That's what I should be doing every day. So I'll use your Post-it note idea. I like that.
Great.
Okay, great.
Well, it was fun talking to you, Josh. Thanks so much for interviewing me.
Thanks, and hopefully we can check in again sometime, and I can let you know what I finished or not.
Yeah, I'll feature you on Instagram.
All right. Have a good rest of the day.
You too. Take care.